All right, welcome everyone. This is our third Thursday live chat with PickFu's co-founders, or in this case, one co-founder. Our other co-founder, John, is on vacation, but I'm here with Justin Chen.
Hey everyone.
My name is Kim Kohatsu. I am the CMO at PickFu. And today we're going to talk about getting more from your poll by actually asking less, by scaling back. And the reason this topic came up is I feel like, when you've got thousands of people ready to answer your questions on demand, you want to make the most of it, right? It's a very exciting prospect. And sometimes maybe we get a little too excited, when we want to ask so much stuff that maybe we don't ask it in an optimal way. And the thing is that the better your question is, the better your answers will be. And so what we're going to do today is just kind of talk about sort of our thinking and give you some recommendations and strategies for getting more from your poll by asking less. So Justin, I wanna wind back the clock and take us back to the early aughts. I suppose it was over 10 years ago. From like a philosophical perspective, why did you make PickFu polls only one question long?
Sure. So yeah, a little back history here. The idea for PickFu came out of our own need to do a couple of things. So the first was we wanted to gather snap judgments on things. And the second was we wanted to understand the why behind those choices. So what we want to do is we wanted to replicate going into a coffee shop and asking strangers, which design do you like? Like this was kind of the accepted way to validate your business idea at the time. It's like, you're going to go talk to strangers, get out of your office and go talk to strangers. So that's what we were trying to do. And so for a while we were asking our friends and family all the time, but they got tired of responding to these requests. And truthfully, if you keep doing this to your own audience, they're going to get tired of it also. And so that's kind of why we built PickFu. So when you're optimizing things that are live, like a web page, you can do live A/B testing, where only one option is presented to a user at a given time, and then you look at click-through rates or conversion rates, and then you could use a tool like Optimizely, and so that's great. However, this doesn't really work for early concepts or things you don't want to see the light of day with your actual customers. And plus, in many cases, you may not have enough customers to even do a live A/B test anyways. Even then, you're not going to understand the why, right? Like you may see a click-through rate increase. Maybe it's just so jarring that they had to click on it. And maybe that's not a good thing. So you really want to understand why people chose things. So with all these things in mind, we decided to come up with a very short survey format of a single question with two options. And that's how it worked in the beginning. And we just required you to choose something and then explain why. The respondents were also given a limited time of just a few minutes. So they aren't sitting there thinking about it too long. And this was intended to replicate real life scenarios where people aren't really considering your product or your ad for long stretches of time. They see it, they try to make a judgment. In this case, we're trying to make them pause a little bit to give an explanation why. So the other reason for this short format is that it reduces the mental friction on both sides of the survey. So on the customer side, the person doing the asking, there's not a long survey form expecting you to ask 5 to 10 to 20 questions at a time. Like we've all made SurveyMonkey surveys or something like that. And so we already knew about these existing solutions, but we weren't using them because we didn't want to go through that hassle every single time that we wanted to ask a question. Plus, then you had to define the audience for it as well. On the respondent side, there's less commitment to decide to answer a single question survey rather than a multi-question survey that might take 20 minutes. And so, does anyone really like doing those surveys, right? You get a survey from, it could be someone that you know, or a company says like, oh, can you answer the survey for me? It's only 20 questions or it's only 20 minutes. Like, you got to allocate time to do that, right? So we knew that we weren't going to get very good responses or fast responses that way. So with our single question format, this is why we're able to get responses so fast. People like doing our surveys, and they're like little quick dopamine hits because it's like, oh, I'm done, next one, and it's something different, right? So in the end, this constrained format of a single question, limited options, allows us to deliver a quick and simple experience for both the customer and also the respondent. And this lets our customers get data like really effortlessly and quickly. So that's that's the backstory.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, customers really have to focus in on what they're looking for.
Hmm.
Because I want to talk about a really common polling error, which is something, it has a fancy name. It's called a double-barreled question. And this is a kind of polling bias that in simple terms sort of asks two distinct questions, but it only allows for one answer, right? And PickFu polls are kind of like that. When you're voting on something, it's yes, you're going to explain it, but you really can only choose one thing, right? If you've got options. And so, an example of a double-barreled question would be, if I were to ask you, do you like your job and does it pay well? And then I gave you a yes or no option, right? Now, you could potentially like your job, but it pays poorly, or your job could pay really well, but you hate it. So do I choose yes or do I choose no? And the thing is if you have 50 respondents that are left to wonder how they should do that, they're all going to do something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somebody's going to interpret, well, I think they really wanted me to prioritize whether I like the job. And, somebody else might think, oh, I think they really wanted me to say whether the job pays well. But they don't really have a clear choice, right? And so by combining those questions into that double-barreled question, you're confusing the answers, right, that you get back. So I want to apply that to PickFu. I'm going to share my screen here. And this is a poll that an author ran. And the question is, which book would you buy and why? Right. And the question itself is fine, the way that it's worded. But the two options each have a different cover design, and they each have a different title, and they each have a different subtitle, and only this one includes the words best-selling author and MBA. And then if you look really closely, option A, the size of the image is actually bigger than option B. So all of these things are different. There's a ton of variables at play here, and any of those things, right, could influence the respondent's decision. So what I think would have worked better in this case is if the author had kind of isolated what it was they were trying to find out. So what I would have done is perhaps I would have run a poll that asked which book title, or based on the title, which book would you rather buy? And I would have tested $1 Million Message against Thought Leader Launch, right? From there, I would see which title won out. And then I would put that same title into a few different layouts. And so, a good rule of thumb that I like to share with people is if you're testing text, you want to make sure all the graphic imagery is the same. And if you're testing imagery, you want to keep the text all the same, right? You only want to test for one thing at a time. And so, let me give you an example of what that kind of looks like. So here's another poll where the author asked, based on the cover, which book would you rather buy? And they do exactly what I was just talking about. The title is the same across every option. The subtitle is the same across every option. This knowledge series little bug, even though it's designed differently, the text is the same, and the author attribution is the same. So you keep everything the same except for the design. And that way you can see, oh, okay, it's really the design of option C, right, that people are responding to. And then, if you were to do it another way, you could take the same design and put two different titles, right, in that. And that's what this author did. And there's an interesting case study on our blog about how he was a new PickFu user and a new author. And this book, which he used PickFu for, actually just skyrocketed to the top of Amazon sales. So it really does work when you can only ask one thing at a time. and make sure that you're really honing in on what it is that you're trying to find out. So, what's nice about testing titles in, kind of a book cover design like this is it gives us a little bit of context, right, about maybe sort of the tone that the book is going to adopt. So why don't we talk a little bit more about context and what we should consider in that regard?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there are situations where you want to provide some context in your question, and definitely situations where you may not want to, in order to see what people say without being given that extra information. So remember, whatever you tell your respondents in that question that's the lens that they're going to view the poll and the options. So you need to know if something is family friendly or sophisticated or some other quality like that. Then put it in there. So I think we're going to take a look at a poll example. Great. Yeah. So in this one, the question is, which logo do you prefer for an app designed to help people create healthy eating habits? And so the question, it does include a description of the app. So it is more about dieting than it is about exercise. And so what that helps people do is give that context, right? So most of the respondents voted for option A because they like the upward progress and accomplishment hinted at by the mountain imagery. So perhaps if we told respondents that the app was more focused on exercise, they might have liked the mountain even more, or maybe they would have been drawn to option C because it evokes motion, kind of like an active kind of thing. We don't know, but we can see how having some context about eating and dieting does influence the way people look at its logo. So let's take a look at this next poll. This one used a very generic question, which logo is more appealing? So we have no idea what Nude Essentials does or sells. So all we're going to look at with these logos is purely the design of it, right? Like the typography and the colors and the themes, more than what the elements are trying to convey, right? Because we don't know what the context. So this information can be very useful to a business as well, especially if it's going to be a general purpose brand or you're going to market it to everyone. Maybe you don't want to give too much context because you're going to be using that mark everywhere. So in this case, the winning option B, was chosen to a large extent because it was the most readable. It didn't have a script font like the other two, and it has a circle element that makes for a strong logo. So maybe if they had given a different context where script fonts were very common, or that kind of flourish was appreciated, then maybe option A or option C might have done better. But in this case, it was a general audience looking at it from a very general lens. So as you approach your PickFu poll, consider how much information you think you should reveal. If you're not sure, think about what you're trying to find out. If you want to make sure your logo communicates a certain message or a business purpose, then you should give that context. If you want to suss out whether people read certain qualities like luxury or calmness, perhaps run a test without context and see if that's what you hear respondents actually saying in the comments without any prompting. Or like in the this poll example, if you're simply trying to decide on fonts and colors, you probably don't need to give any context. So you should also consider thinking about running a combination of polls with context, without context, so that you can compare the feedback and really read through those explanations, because that's where the meat of all the value for the PickFu polls comes from. Oh, you're muted.
I am muted. I was worried about my dog barking. Yeah, that's definitely a good tip. And I do want to share one last tip. But before I do, I want to invite anybody watching live to use the comments to ask any questions. We're happy to answer them for you. If we don't get to your questions in this session, if you're watching the replay, you can definitely still ask questions. It'll just take us a little bit longer to get to them. But please, feel free to comment away, even if you just want to say hi. It's nice to know that you're out there. So our last tip that I am going to offer is to keep your question and the language in that question plain and objective. So I feel like a lot of times what happens is people, again, they get excited and they want to, kind of convey that, and they want people to be as pumped up about their idea as they are. But you really do want to keep your question fact-based, because the opinion should come from the respondents. The opinion should not come from the question. And, what I mean by that is, let's say, I put on a new outfit and I ask you, does this outfit make me look fat? Now, I'm kind of giving you a little bit of a cue of the answer that I'm looking for, right? I want reassurance that, no, you don't look fat. So first of all, let's end body shaming. You should not do that. But secondly, what it teaches us is that your PickFu poll can kind of do that too, right? You can nudge people in a direction, and that's going to skew your results. So consider this. If you were to ask a question like, how interested are you in this idea? What that kind of does is it opens up the possibilities for respondents to say, I'm not really interested in that idea, or I am really interested in that idea, but it kind of gives a range, right? It invites a range. But if I ask, do you absolutely love this idea? I mean, I think most people are going to want to agree with me, right? And so we're introducing what's called positive bias into the question. So again, what I would recommend is to keep your question plain, keep it fact-based. So if you are going to add context, as we just talked about, keep it fact-based. Our business does X, Y, or Z. Our app does X, Y, or Z, or whatever. Keep it fact-based. And then really use neutral language. How interested are you? What do you prefer? How would you judge those, right? Stay away from love, hate, those sorts of really kind of polarized words. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep the question unbiased, and that will give you the most honest responses back. So this session was all about getting more from your PickFu poll by asking less. And just to recap, we talked about, why PickFu polls are only one question. So, even though we know you can put more than one question in that one question field, it was really only made for one question. We talked about double-barreled questions and why you want to kind of isolate a parameter. We talked about context, and we talked about keeping your language plain. If there are any questions, please send them our way now. We do have a couple of comments. So I enjoyed the PickFu agency shootout yesterday. Thank you. What do you think of open-ended questions? How would you improve this product? So Justin, why don't you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so that's a that's a great question. So we do have a format where you can just get feedback on just the question or maybe one option. And so that was a newer format that we added a few years ago. And so you can just upload an image of your product or maybe a description of it. And this is a great tactic to just ask a very objective, like, how would you improve this product? What do you like or not like about this product? You could use this for a web page, even a listing. We use this all the time internally when we're just trying to gather feedback on something. So I do think it's great because at the beginning of a process, maybe you don't know what direction you want to go in terms of creating variations, but you know that something needs to be improved. And this is a great way to source it. You can look through all the explanations. We do some word frequency aggregation for you on your responses. So you'll be able to see what people are saying. Maybe it's the color or the shape or the packaging that they're commenting on. And looking through all those explanations will give you a prioritized list of maybe what you should focus on for the next version that you're working on. The other interesting way to use those open-ended polls is to ask people how they would describe a product. And so this could be useful for when you're trying to write product descriptions or keywords or SEO even. So a lot of interesting ways to do that open-ended stuff.
Yeah, and what I really like about open-ended questions is that sometimes it can make you aware of things that you never thought of.
Hmm.
So what's really great is sometimes what we will do is we will show people, a website or a prototype or, some kind of landing page, or an Amazon listing is a really popular one.
Hmm.
We ask people to give it a quick look and come back with any questions they have, right? And what you start to see is what's not clear
Hmm.
about what you're conveying, what kind of common sorts of concerns or objections people might have about the product, right? Why is it $50? Or why is it, why is this? Or do I need this? Or how easy is this to take care of? Is this garment machine washable? And you start to see, oh, well, these are things I haven't addressed. And
Hmm.
so I think an open-ended question is really great in an open-ended format. I think what we were mostly talking about, Norman, is when you're giving people certain options to vote on, that's when you have to be a little bit more careful. I think in an open-ended question, you can be a lot looser with your language and with your with how you format the question. Great question, though.
So it might be a little dangerous if you said, which one would you buy? And also, what would you improve about it?
Exactly.
That's too many
Right.
questions.
Right. Yeah, we had an example the other day where somebody, asked, which design do you like, and is $39.99 too much for it? And it's like, well, I like this one, but what are you asking me? Right. So you kind of can, confuse people. All right. Thank you, Norman, for the question. We have another one. I have a problem child Amazon listing that isn't performing nearly as well as I think it should. How can I best use PickFu to diagnose that? So I do think an open-ended question might work in this situation. Mm-hmm. So what we have a lot of sellers do is you basically link to your Amazon listing and you ask a question like, after viewing this listing, what questions do you have about the product? Mm-hmm. And what people will do is they will look at, your description, they'll look through your photos, they'll look through whatever. And sometimes you might see things like, well, I mean, it's not really highly rated, or, so you might get things that you can't directly impact, but maybe you realize, oh, well, I need to go out and gather more ratings. Or maybe it's like, well, it doesn't look like it's high quality. So maybe you should think about whether, you want to reshoot the product or something along those lines. But what I think it does is it helps surface a lot of objections. Mm-hmm. The other thing you might want to think about is if it's just not getting a lot of traffic, perhaps what you do is you test it against some competitors, right? And you start to understand maybe why are more people clicking on this listing versus my listing, right? And so maybe you take a screenshot of the search results, or maybe you isolate parts of the search results to kind of compare you against another person, right? And in this case, maybe what you want to do is you want to X out things like price and ratings because you can't change the other guy's price, right? So if they're cheaper than you, then people might say, well, I clicked on this one because it's cheaper, and you can't really do much about that, right? Or this product has more ratings than you, and there's not a lot, that you can do about it. And so, it might behoove you to kind of think, before you're listing, what are people seeing?
Yeah, I like those.
So, yeah. Anything to add there, Justin?
No, I mean, I think that competitive test is a really good way to do it, because it could be a combination of all those different factors. So I would try with all the information and then try to start isolating different and kind of normalizing across them to see, is it the value proposition combination of price and products, or is it just the appeal of it through the image or the title?
Yeah, I would say a competitive main image test could be very effective here. Mm-hmm. So main image, we know, has a huge impact on click-through rate. And it's something that you can change, right? So take your main image, put it up against a competitor, and see are there things that they're doing that you should emulate, right? Are there little tricks and things that maybe you could learn from, right? Does their product seem bigger than yours, right? We all know that the box, right, the Amazon image box is the same for everybody, and yet, if you really go corner to corner with the imagery and you fill the frame, a lot of times that can have a big impact, right? Do you tilt the box a certain way? Do you, there's all kinds of these tricks and stuff that you can consider. I would also, because you're on our YouTube page, I would direct you to our PickFu for e-commerce videos. We have a woman named Daniela who runs through a ton of tutorials, and she does just that. She optimizes Amazon listings using PickFu, and that is a great resource that you could learn a lot from.
Yeah. I think not to harp on the competitive thing too much, but I think a lot of sellers, a lot of customers stop short where they might have optimized the variations that they've generated really well, but you should try to validate it at the end by doing an actual competitive test against the category leaders, just so that and you could start it, you could do one in the beginning too. You could test your original version and then you could test your final version, just to know that you're going to have a little bit more confidence when you go out into the marketplace with this new imagery.
All right, how do I point the participants to my listing and ask for generalized feedback? That's a great question. So what you're going to do is you're going to start a PickFu poll, and I think we asked you at the beginning whether you want feedback, so comparing two different options, or whether you want open-ended feedback. You're going to choose open-ended feedback, right? And you can use one of our suggested questions. You can edit that suggested questions to meet your needs. But what you're going to do then is, in the option field, you just put your URL and it will be clickable to them. And they will then go through and basically just run your poll, go through checkout, the whole nine. And as soon as respondents start coming to your poll, they'll see, oh, I'm supposed to click on this URL to go look at it. Or if you want to, if you want to kind of keep them inside PickFu, you could also just take a screenshot of certain aspects of your listing too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The last thing I want to add about all these questions, I know a lot of people have a lot of questions. Feel free to tap into our live chat or schedule a free strategy session with someone from our customer success team. Like we're always happy to help guide you through the questions, to give you that confidence to start the poll without it being unbiased, or with it being unbiased and not double-barreled and all that. So I know that we're giving a lot of guidance here, but if you have any doubt, you can always just write in and ask us, is this a good question for what I'm trying to do?
Yes, and I will say, another thing that you can do is you can go to this link, and if you have things that you'd like us to test for you in our next Third Thursday, you might just win a free poll. And what we will do is we will run the poll for you. We will actually analyze your results in our next Third Thursday session if you win. So I also encourage you to do that. So thank you for watching. Thanks for the great questions. And we will catch you next month on Third Thursday. Bye, everybody.